This is BBC One. Now, the news with Hugh Edwards. It's 6 o'clock.
The Queen Mother lies in state and thousands gather to pay tribute. Her coffin is escorted through London in a great display of pageantry. William and Harry are among the royal group, which follows the carriage to Westminster. Tonight, there's a 6-hour wait as the public waits to pay their respects. Also today, more fighting in the Middle East as fresh peace talks are now planned.
Here, another privately funded hospital on the critical list. 2 days before it's due to open, managers admit they're weeks behind schedule. And the alien invader attacking our lakes, and it can't be killed off.
Good evening. Nearly 500,000 people lined the streets of central London today as the Queen Mother's coffin was taken to lie in state at Westminster Hall. In glorious sunshine, the carriage made its way from the Queen's Chapel, escorted by a grand procession on a scale not seen in the capital for many, many years. 14 members of the royal family followed on foot, including the Prince of Wales and his 2 sons, William and Harry. The coffin will now rest at Westminster until the Queen Mother's funeral at the Abbey nearby on Tuesday. Our royal correspondent, Jenny Bond, describes the day's events.
On a fresh spring day, the sort that she loved, the Queen Mother's coffin was carried from the Queen's Chapel. It was the start of a grand and sombre pageant befitting a former Queen consort, the last Empress of India. 3 generations of her family lined up behind the gun carriage. For Prince Charles, it was a day he had dreaded, a farewell to a grandmother who, for him, was simply magical. The Princess Royal, in her naval uniform, breaking the tradition that only male mourners take part in the procession. And for William, a sad reminder of the day that he and Harry took their place behind their mother's coffin almost 5 years ago. In the Mall, the crowds, some of the 400,000 gathered along the route, waited to witness a moment in history. As the cortege moved off, the Queen Mother's personal standard above her home, Clarence House, was lowered for the last time. It will never fly again. This was a procession the like of which had not been seen for 40 years. More than 1,600 servicemen and women from the many regiments associated with the Queen Mother escorted her coffin along the way. In all, 14 members of her family marched behind. The Duke of Edinburgh, now 80 years old, flanked by his sons and daughter. On top of the coffin, the crown made for her coronation in 1937, set with 2,800 diamonds, including the most famous of them all, the Kohinoor. And a single wreath of white roses and freesias from her daughter. The inscription, "In loving memory, Lilibet." The Queen, with her niece, Lady Sarah Chatto, and the other women of the royal family, made their way to Westminster Hall by car. The Queen, though composed, has been greatly saddened by her mother's death, so soon after her sister's and in her Jubilee year. For every minute of the procession, a royal gun salute was fired from Green Park. And along the route, so many landmarks in the Queen Mother's life. The statue of her husband, George VI, her beloved Bertie. His death, half a century ago, had left her bereft. Had attended to pay their last respects. For the Queen Mother's household, as for her family, this was the end of an era. Her private secretary, Sir Alistair Aird, marched behind, with her page, William Tallon, following on. The cortege moved on past the cenotaph, where, in November, the Queen Mother made one of her last appearances, paying tribute to the war dead, as she did each year. On the stroke of noon, the procession wound its way into the Palace of Westminster. There, the Queen was waiting to receive the coffin. As the 8 pallbearers from the Irish Guards lifted it from the gun carriage, a salute from a granddaughter and a bow from a grandson. For Prince Charles, a moment of uncharted grief. As a choir from Westminster Abbey and the Chapels Royal sang a psalm for a woman who was herself deeply religious, her coffin was taken to the catafalque, where it will lie for the next 3 days. It was a solemn ceremony, watched by parliamentarians of all parties. The Archbishop of Canterbury said 2 simple prayers.
O Lord, our Heavenly Father, Almighty and everlasting God, we remember before Thee our sister, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. We give thanks for her example of faithful duty and unwearied service, and for the loyalty and love which she inspired.
Then silence, as the gold processional cross from Westminster Abbey was carried to the head of the coffin. The Queen Mother's life of duty, now finally over, is being marked by this lying in state, an honour attributed to only one other Queen Consort in modern times. Officers of the Household Cavalry have mounted a round-the-clock vigil. It will continue until Tuesday morning, when the coffin will be taken to Westminster Abbey for the funeral. And with that guard in place, the Queen and Duke left the hall. As they drove back to the palace, the crowds burst into spontaneous applause. And on Monday evening, the vigil by the coffin will be mounted by the Queen Mother's 4 grandsons, a final tribute to the grandmother Prince Charles called so gloriously unstoppable. Jenny Bond, BBC News.
All day, and in 1 or 2 cases all night, people have been queuing near the Palace of Westminster. The lines have been stretching for well over a mile as members of the public wait for the chance to pay their respects to the Queen Mother. Our man Robert Hall is among the crowds there this evening. Robert, it's a long, patient wait for lots of people.
Yes, it is indeed, Hugh, and what an extraordinary sight for the drivers now on their way home from work. Nobody really knew how many people would respond to today's ceremony. Buckingham Palace, whilst hoping the crowds would be large, accepted that many years have passed since an occasion like this was last staged, and that people might prefer to stay at home and watch it on television. The figures of the numbers of people here have probably even exceeded their expectations. Under the 900-year-old vaulted ceiling of Westminster Hall, there is almost total silence as those files move slowly through and back out into the sunshine. Queues that began at 2 o'clock this afternoon and have barely diminished since then. A patient thread of humanity running through Westminster tonight, drawn here by a common purpose. Police estimate that up to 20,000 people chose to pay a personal tribute within an hour of the formal ceremony ending. From Parliament Square, they stretched back over a mile, crossing and recrossing the river, in sight of their destination, but at least 4 hours away. Among the fortunate at the head of the queue, Sally Foster with her 2 children and her sister. They'd travelled here from Brighton.
I feel very sorry for the Queen and the rest of the family. I think she's had a pretty hard time in the last few weeks, but it's just nice to come up and show respect for everybody, really.
And we did the same when Princess Diana died. We came and saw the flowers and things, and just really show the royal family our respect, really, for the Queen Mother.
300 yards back, welcome refreshment for those whose determination was beginning to flag.
I also remember my father crying when the old king died. That's why I'm here today.
She's done a lot to the country, so I really want to pay my own respect.
I know that the Queen Mother was a very lovely person, so I just wanted to come give thanks.
Some of those filing silently through Westminster Hall recalled the death of Winston Churchill. Many, like Irene Dobson, paused to gaze at the draped coffin and its silent guardians.
And it was just lovely to be in there, in that wonderful building. I've never been in there before, and just to see the coffin draped with the crown on the top.
And because we're a country of tradition, and there are not many other countries with royal families, and it's good to be part of that.
At sunset, weary feet were still edging along the riverside paths, an expression of sympathy and gratitude that will itself become part of history. I think what struck many of us here today was the mix of people of all ages, some visitors to London, some just curious, some because they'd heard stories of the Queen Mother from their parents or their grandparents, others who were too young really to understand what was going on and no doubt will have it explained to them much later on in their lives. But all here with that common purpose. If you ask them why they came, most of them said, we just simply wanted to be here. Hugh.
Robert, thank you very much for that. We'll be returning to Westminster at the end of this evening's programme, but we'll have a look at the day's other news now. In the Middle East, Israel's action against the Palestinians has carried on today, despite the call from President Bush for the Israelis to stop and withdraw. The Israeli army stopped journalists attending a meeting between Yasser Arafat and the American Special Envoy, which took place at the Palestinian leaders' bombed-out headquarters. And again, one of the worst affected areas is Bethlehem, where violence has been raging for 5 days. From there, our Middle East correspondent Orla Guerin sent this report.
The Central Market in Bethlehem, or at least it used to be. Now America said enough is enough. These troops not paying much heed, though. Name took me to her house, her first return. Soldiers still nearby. We couldn't risk being seen.
Why did it this? I didn't do anything.
Her modest home has been destroyed.
Do you think that President Bush can do anything to help you now?
No. Nobody can help me. God only can help me.
Nearby, the streets coming to life. The war goes on, but the curfew lifted for a while. This is a taste of freedom. For the first time in days, families here are outside their houses. They're hoping to get a little food if they can find it. They know President Bush is applying pressure and they're hoping Israel will be forced to pull out. But they're worried about what may happen between now and then. Other worries in Jerusalem today. Police checking on the buses, searching for the next suicide bomber. No one here is too happy about America's intervention.
I have very mixed feelings. I think that they needed to let Israel as a sovereign nation do what they need to do and wait for it to play out, and then at that time would be the right time to come.
The US Secretary of State Colin Powell is coming soon. In the meantime, Israel is still on guard and still fighting in the West Bank. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Bethlehem.
The crisis in the Middle East will take up much of the time Mr. Blair will spend with President Bush when they meet in the United States this weekend. They're due to hold talks at the Bush family ranch in Texas. Our correspondent Nick Bryant is there. Nick, what can we expect in these talks, do you think?
Hugh, this summit was supposed to be all about Saddam Hussein and how to get rid of him, but they've been completely overtaken by events here in Crawford, Texas. The Middle East will dominate as the two leaders gather here at what George W. Bush calls his Western White House.
How are you?
Pile them high and sell them cheap. The Brits are coming souvenir T-shirts, Crawford's contribution to the Bush-Blair summit. The Prime Minister's a popular figure here, viewed as a founding partner in the war on terrorism. And now he's trying to help shape America's Middle East policy as well, giving strong backing to the president's decision to send Colin Powell to the region.
In that situation, where the two sides are so locked in conflict like that, they can't get together without an external force bringing them together. And I think we've got to deepen that process. It's one of the things, obviously, I will discuss with the president over the course of the next few days.
So why the U-turn in American policy? Israeli leader Ariel Sharon welcomed by President Bush for his fourth meeting at the White House, something which this administration's never offered Yasser Arafat, and pointedly so. Some of the president's closest advisors look upon the Palestinian leader as a man of war, not of peace. They see clear parallels between Sharon's attacks on what he calls the Palestinian terror network and America's campaign against al-Qaeda. Trouble is, the recent violence has destabilized the whole region, sparking demonstrations like this one in Istanbul earlier on today. That threatens America's wider war on terrorism. Arab leaders have been alarmed by what they view as the Bush administration's pro-Israeli stance, and this was how they responded last month at a summit of the Arab League. Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia embraced the Iraqi vice president, Saddam Hussein's right-hand man. It was meant as a clear signal to the Americans that winning support for a regime change in Baghdad will be much harder than they thought.
So joining an international community, finding partners to join it is going to be very difficult for George W. Bush. As they say here in Texas right now, the president's all hat, but no cattle.
OK, Nick, thanks for that. Now, back home, the first recruits to join the new police service of Northern Ireland started work this afternoon. Just over 40 officers graduated in Belfast today. They're the first to do so since recruitment procedures were changed to encourage equal numbers of Catholics and Protestants into the force there. It's been another day of rail chaos for many passengers across England and North Wales. A 48-hour pay strike by staff at Arriva Trains Northern began at midnight, and 700 drivers also walked out from First North West for 24 hours in a dispute over a disciplinary matter. And the lead guitarist with rock group R.E.M., Peter Buck, has been found not guilty of causing a disturbance on a British Airways flight. He'd been accused of a drunken rampage and assaulting an air stewardess on a transatlantic flight from Seattle to London a year ago. Now, I think it's fair to say that we've heard all this before. An asteroid on collision course with Earth. We're all doomed, etc. But not quite yet, it seems. Not for another 878 years, in fact. Our science correspondent Fergus Walsh is here. Fergus, are we meant to get excited by this?
Don't panic just yet, Hugh. There's a 1 in 300 chance of a direct hit on Earth. That may not sound much, but it's by far the biggest known threat from space. So where is it? Well, this is the solar system. Now, just as the planets orbit the sun, here's the Earth, so do the asteroids. There are millions of them out here in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And this is what scientists predict could happen. This is one possible future orbit of asteroid 1950 DA on a collision course with Earth. Astronomers even know the exact date, March the 16th, 2880. So what are we dealing with? Well, the asteroid is about half a mile wide and would hit the Earth with a force of tens of thousands of megatons of TNT, equivalent to hundreds of Hiroshima atomic bombs. Of course, it won't be the first time the Earth has been bombarded by asteroids and comets since its formation. An impact 65 million years ago is thought to have wiped out the dinosaurs. Fortunately, the asteroid heading our way is 10 times smaller, but it would still cause devastation.
We need to recognise that this is really a wake-up call for the human race. We basically live in a cosmic 10-pin bowling alley where we're one of the pins, and sooner or later we'll get bowled over.
This crater in Arizona was caused by an asteroid just 150 feet across. Scientists say one half a mile wide simply must be stopped.
Well, there's two real ways of dealing with the problem. The first is what I call the Bruce Willis solution, which is to try and blow the thing to bits. Not a good plan. You're simply converting a bullet into a shotgun blast. We'll still take the same amount of damage. The other way is to just gently nudge the object off course so it misses.
Now, this isn't science fiction. In 2 years, NASA will launch Operation Deep Impact. A spacecraft will fly towards a comet and then release this half-ton lump of copper, which will deliberately crash into the surface. The impact will be so great, it should alter the comet's orbit. Now, if we can do that now, our descendants have 35 more generations to plan how to deal with this rogue asteroid. Hugh.
And that is a great relief, Fergus. Thank you very much. OK, it's Friday. Time to look ahead to plenty of weekend sport, including the Grand National, of course. How could we forget? Hazel's here with all the details. Hi, Hazel.
Thanks, Hugh. Good evening to you. Yes, the bookies are predicting that a record-breaking flutter of £120 million will be bet on tomorrow's Martel Grand National. A maximum field of 40 runners will go to post at Aintree, and our sports correspondent Daniela Ralph has been looking ahead to tomorrow's alternative national lottery.
It was a sombre start to the day as the Queen Mother's procession was shown across the course. It was again a time for reflection. Some of the jockeys spent the morning at Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool. For the likes of Tony McCoy, though, tomorrow's Grand National was never far from his mind.
Maybe you should be riding Blowing Wind instead of me.
Blowing Wind is the record-breaking jockey's national hope. For trainer Martin Pipe, there's a belief this horse will give McCoy that elusive victory.
He's in fine form. Blowing Wind, as you know, he won at the Cheltenham Festival. He's coming here fit and well. Let's hope he does it again and gets round and finishes first.
For both jockey and trainer, the Grand National remains the most unpredictable of events. Around 15 million people will have a bet on tomorrow's race.
5SP3.
They'll gamble around £120 million. Bookmakers are also expected to profit from the first Grand National since betting became tax-free.
Come on, Richie, lads!
It will be a race for horses who like the hard ground. Last year, only 4 finished, but the lack of rain should see more complete the course tomorrow. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, Aintree.
And BBC Sports racing presenter Claire Balding joins us now from Aintree. Good evening, Claire. A big spill today for champion jockey Tony McCoy. How serious are his injuries and how likely is it that he will take part tomorrow?
Well, he had a very bad fall in the 6th race on the card here on a horse called Is No Good, and he took a fair old whack to the head. I went in actually and saw him while he was being treated by the physiotherapist, which was an interesting sight, and he was full of dismay because Tom Scudamore had taken his ride in the last race and won on Ravenswood. Now, if he was only angry about that, it would suggest to me that he's not that badly hurt, and basically if he can walk and talk, and probably not even talk, he'll be riding in the Grand National tomorrow. He's not the only jockey injured, actually. Mick Fitzgerald's also got to pass the doctor in the morning, so too is Richard Johnson and Roddy Green, so 4 jockeys will have fairly serious medical tests tomorrow.
Now, last year it was a real quagmire and only 4 horses finished. What will this year's conditions dictate, do you think, Claire?
Well, the ground is that much quicker. It's good ground all the way around. Now, that to me means that an awful lot of horses will finish the race. We could be looking at 20 or more finishes, which is a huge contrast to last year. And it also means the time will be very fast. It's a very high-quality race this year, much more so than in recent years, probably since Papillon. That was a good race 2 years ago. And that means you're looking at the really classy horses. David's Lad is well fancied. Ad Hoc will probably be favourite. And Blowing Wind for Tony McCoy. If he's not feeling too sore, he knows that he's got a real good chance of winning his first ever Grand National.
Claire, enjoy it. Thanks for joining us. Well, Manchester United and Ireland captain Roy Keane will be out of action for 4 to 6 weeks. It's been confirmed that the midfielder tore a hamstring during Tuesday's Champions League quarter-final against Deportivo La Coruña. He now faces a race to be fit in time for the World Cup finals. It's the last weekend of Rugby Union's Six Nations Championship, with France aiming to complete the Grand Slam against Ireland. And in Cardiff, the match between Wales and Scotland will mark the end of a grand career for the BBC's Bill McLaren after more than 50 years in broadcasting. The voice of rugby gave us his predictions for the weekend's big games.
Well, Wales versus Scotland at Cardiff is very much a matter of pride on this occasion, isn't it? Because each country hasn't had its troubles to seek during this season. And of course, there's a certain special aspect to it, isn't there? Rob Howley's last international for Wales, and of course, Gregor Townsend setting a new Scottish record of caps, 66 altogether. Ireland beating France would be something. And the Irish are capable of doing it. They beat France not so long ago. And you know, with O'Driscoll there and Ireland on a high, you never know. But that French side looks very formidable to me. I've never seen so many big French three-quarters before. England versus Italy in Rome, well, yeah, there's only one winner of that one. It would be the shock of the century, I think, if Italy were to beat England. This England squad is as strong a squad as I can remember since the days of Bill Bowman, you remember, in the 1980 Grand Slam. But, well, you never know. Rome is Rome. Of course, for me, it's a heart-tugging affair, isn't it? Because this will be my last Six Nations commentary. It's appropriate in a way that it's down here in Cardiff, where I've had such great fun over the years, and where I've been provided with some wonderful rugby football by Wales, especially in that great decade between 69 and 79, when Wales put everybody to the sword at one time or another. It'll be a wrench, but then it'll be lovely to put my feet up and watch other fellas doing all the homework and the hard work.
Yes, they'll be missed, and there's full live coverage of Bill's last match and, of course, the other two Six Nations games on BBC Radio and television over the weekend. And, of course, the Grand National will be live in Grandstand tomorrow from 1 o'clock.
Bill's the best, no doubt about it.
Absolutely, he will be missed.
Thanks a lot, Hazel. OK, weather then for all the sport, Isabel?
Oh, well, nice, sunny, but it's going to feel colder, Hugh. So anyone heading off to Aintree tomorrow, just bear in mind it'll be a chilly easterly breeze, really quite a brisk easterly. And in fact, that's the theme for all of us this weekend. Still a good deal of sunshine to look forward to. A lovely weekend to be out, whether you're watching the rugby or just out in your gardens. But there will be a cold easterly, and that'll still be with us in the south on Sunday. Possibly just a bit more cloud on Sunday in more eastern areas. We can see that brisk easterly then. That's pegged the temperatures back a little bit today, even in London, for example, only 16 Celsius. And you can see how that stays strongest in the south tomorrow, possibly even gales in the English Channel. Now, that easterly bringing in a bit more cloud during the morning tomorrow, but I think that'll tend to break up quite well, and we can look forward to a good deal of sunshine. A lovely day, really, to be out, as I said, but it will feel colder, even colder than today, really. Temperatures 8 or 9 in the east, maybe only 11 or 12 for London, and just a few sheltered western areas seeing temperatures creeping up to 14 or 15 degrees. And then for Sunday, again, a good deal of sunshine, especially in the west, possibly just a bit more cloud in eastern areas. That's it. Hugh.
Isabel, thank you very much. Well, let's return now, as promised, to the day's main events in London as the Queen Mother's coffin was taken to lie in state. Among the many thousands who lined the route today were 3 people, each with a special role to play over the coming days. Duncan Kennedy brings us their stories.
Another job finish for the lifeboat men of the River Thames. John Tough only joined the RNLI in January, but it was a charity headed by the Queen Mother since 1937, so he decided he would go and witness today's ceremony.
I would like to have a mark of respect to her for the work that she's done for the charity and for the dedication that she's shown to everyone.
We travelled with John up to London so he could witness events in person. In Parliament Square, he joined the crowds, waiting patiently until the moment the cortege passed.
Very moving, and the ripple of applause that came over the crowd as the cortege moved through, and feel that I'm here to see a piece of history.
History is playing a central role in other ways too. As part of the Queen's bodyguard, Colonel Greville Tufnell will stand next to the Queen Mother's coffin. He's known the moment before, here escorting the funeral cortege of Sir Winston Churchill in 1965. Colonel Tufnell says he's privileged to be in the front row of history for the second time.
It's amazing to be able to do duty and vigil over the Queen Mother, who one's seen all one's life and respected and loved. And I mean, to be, it's, you know, it really makes it so much more personal to be able to do it there.
It's been personal for Erica Burley too. A captain in the King's Troop Royal Artillery, which fired today's gun salute. She's planning to get married tomorrow. But as the day drew to an end, she told us she's postponing her honeymoon to take part in the Queen Mother's funeral next week.
The honeymoon comes later. Duty first, and
We will finish our part in the events on Tuesday, which have yet to be confirmed. But sometime towards the end of next week, I think we'll probably manage to get a few days away.
Dedication and duty, the Queen Mother's own twin mantra for life, witnessed and performed by so many today. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
And that's all from us for now, on the day the country witnessed its greatest display of pageantry for many years. Tonight, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, is lying in state at Westminster Hall. From everyone on the 6 o'clock news, good evening.
Working around the world, I've learned to make the connections. The civil war in Congo 1 year is the next year's refugee problem. That's the way the world really works. The difference is analysis. I know I can report the facts. What I really want now is the space to try to understand them.
George Alagaya presents BBC 4 News, The Global Perspective, weeknights at 8. BBC 4. Everybody needs a place to think.
Now, look north with Carol Malia and John Lawrence.
Hello and welcome to the programme.
In today's headlines, another public embarrassment for a privately financed hospital. It was due to open on Monday. Now managers admit they're more than 2 weeks behind schedule.
We've gone through the last 35 months without any problems whatsoever. So it's very frustrating to come up at the last minute with a problem that means we've got to put the thing on hold for a little while.
The alien invader now attacking our lakes and it can't be killed off.
Children's toy or a rich man's plaything, the tiny cars with a big price tag. Also tonight, the North pays tribute to the Queen Mother.
And we preview a special collection of those famous hats about to go on show at the Family Museum. Another new and privately funded hospital in the north is at the centre of controversy tonight. It was already facing criticism over a chaotic shortage of parking spaces, which left doctors and nurses queuing for permits. Now, just 2 days before it's due to open its doors, the management have admitted it won't be ready for at least 2 more weeks. Well, our health correspondent, Anne Costalis, is there now. And this is becoming all too familiar territory, isn't it?
That's right, John. This certainly isn't the first PFI hospital that I've stood outside of talking about problems that it's having. And viewers may well remember criticisms of our other 2 privately financed hospitals. We've heard it all before. The arguments over PFI hospitals began with the first one in the country at Carlisle. Failing generators and cramped wards were blamed on cost-cutting. Next was Durham. Bed shortages and cancelled operations there were also put down to the private finance scheme. Managers here at Bishop Auckland were probably hoping 3rd time lucky, but today they had to apologise to staff over parking arrangements and announce a delay in the hospital's opening date. All more ammunition for Unison, who have long claimed PFI means hospitals on the cheap.
I mean, here we are, high-profile hospital. I mean, it's very embarrassing for the authorities, the fact that it's not opening on time. And what's the reason for it? I mean, costs must come into it at some point. Otherwise, surely they'd have got these things right.
It's certainly not a good start for the new hospital. Even the builders here decided to cover up their sign when they knew we were filming. But the people of Bishop Auckland have waited an awful long time for their new hospital and may be prepared to give it more of a chance than Unison will.
So, Anne, what's been going wrong this time?
Well, there's been a problem with the car parking, John. Now, Unison would say that if land hadn't been sold off here to make money, then there would be more space for car parking. But basically what's happened is there were chaotic scenes when staff had to queue for hours to get their parking permits this week. And there are claims that there are just 200 parking spaces, yet 400 permits issued. Now, certainly there will be more car parking built here, but that's going to take time because land will have to be cleared to do that. Now, John Saxby is Chief Executive of the Bishop Auckland General Hospital, and he's with me now. It must be very disappointing for you that you're not going to be able to open the hospital on Monday. Why the delay?
I think disappointment is the right word, Anne. We've been looking forward over the last three and a half years to moving into our new hospital, and we had hoped, almost up until the last minute, that we would get in slightly ahead of schedule towards the end of May. And the moves, which were to coincide with that, should have started this weekend, and many staff had put themselves aside so that they could help in the move. I was going to be here helping the move, and yet, disappointingly, we cannot start that move this weekend.
We've heard a lot of criticism of PFI at Carlisle and Durham. Is the real reason you're having problems because this is a hospital built on the cheap?
This is a £67 million hospital, so I don't think anybody could say this is a hospital built on the cheap. What we have to do is to make sure before we move into our new hospital that it's actually right for us to occupy. And what we don't want to do is move into a building and then find or know in advance that we've actually got some work to do before we go in there.
OK, John Saxby, thank you very much for joining us. Just a reminder, the new hospital won't be opening next week. Of course, the old one will still be open. As soon as we know when the new one will open, we'll be letting you know. Now back to the studio.
Thanks, Anne. The pressure to cut hospital waiting lists has brought another batch of workers out on the streets in a dispute over their increased workload. Today it was the turn of medical secretaries at South Tyneside General Hospital to join the protest over pay, which has hit hospitals across the region. Colin Briggs joined them on the picket line.
There may have been smiles and friendly waves as passing drivers sounded their support. But the resolve amongst the secretaries was strong. Along with colleagues at other hospitals, they want regrading to take account of the dramatic increase in their workload in the fight against waiting lists.
We come in early, sometimes 7:30 in the morning, and it's sometimes 6:30 at night when we're finished, you know. So it's very, very much a lot of loyalty we have.
They feel that for a long time they've had quite a raw deal. You know, we're loyal sort of employees and we do our best, and we really think that we've been left behind.
I've never ever striked in my life before, but we just feel that we're not getting anywhere. No one will sort of listen to us, so we've had to resort to this.
This is the first action at South Tyneside, but 3 more days are planned for next week. There is some hope, though, with the news that strikes in South Durham over the grading issue have been called off in response to a new offer from management.
Well, we're still some way away. The deal offered here doesn't take us up towards the top of grade 4. We've been making it clear that we're prepared to negotiate, we're prepared to be reasonable if we have offers that reasonably address the grading issue. We're always prepared to talk. We're still prepared to talk today.
There will be delays and cancellations, but the secretaries insist lives will not be placed in jeopardy.
Well, meanwhile, another long-running industrial dispute has been affecting the region today. Arriva conductors were staging their 7th day of action in a dispute over pay. Pickets were out again at Middlesbrough at the start of a 48-hour strike, which runs until midnight tomorrow. The latest talks between Arriva and the RMT broke down without agreement yesterday.
The Tyne and Wear metro operator Nexus and the unions are remaining tight-lipped today about the details of a possible settlement in the dispute over pay, which threatened to derail a royal opening ceremony. It's understood an improved offer was made during yesterday's talks with the arbitration service ACAS. Officials from all 4 unions involved say they'll recommend their members accept the new terms. In the meantime, Monday's strike by ASLEF drivers has been called off and trains will run as normal. If a deal's reached, it means the official opening of the new Wearside Metro extension can go ahead when the Queen visits the region next month.
2 of our most famous and beautiful lakes are being damaged by a pondweed which is alien to Britain. Bassenthwaite Lake and Derwent Water are under attack from the invader called New Zealand pygmyweed, which is unlikely to be completely eradicated. Well, now, as Judy Ingham reports, the fight is on to stop it spreading to other important lakes in Cumbria.
When boats or boots have been in this lake, Derwent Water, who'd have thought they could then be a hazard to other lakes? Well, they could. It's because they could easily have picked up a bit of weed, a certain kind of weed. The smallest scrap of New Zealand pygmy weed, also called Australian swamp stonecrop, can pose a threat to new areas of lake. Dense new growth comes fast and triffid-like from the tiniest broken-off bit. Already a messy fringe along some of Derwent Water's shore testifies to the problem here.
It is quite sad to see so much. In fact, 20 years ago when the lake was surveyed, there was no crassula. It's got a very long growing season. It has very little dormancy at all. In the winter it doesn't stop growing, it just keeps going. And it tends to overrun everything else and it will outcompete other native species which would normally be found in this area.
The weed's been used for decades for garden ponds, and it's gradually becoming naturalised across the country. When it takes over, other plant life which should be in the lake hasn't got much chance.
It's quite difficult to get rid of, and the only way you can get rid of it is burning or using chemical methods. And the chemical methods are, not always practical. So it's important that people make sure that they don't take it away with them, really. That's the best message we can try and get across.
And if natural local plants get squeezed out, that means fewer habitats for little aquatic animals and fish. So it's a worry, and environmentalists at the National Park Authority have produced a new leaflet to alert the public. It says people should clean weeds from their equipment, whether fishing tackle or boat propellers, before leaving an affected lake. Otherwise, a trip enjoying the natural environment could end up accidentally harming it.
Hundreds of people from across the region have been paying tribute to Her Majesty the Queen Mother today. Some signed books of condolence, whilst others simply observed a minute's silence. And the Bowes Family Museum has had its own plans to remember her, as Laura Rostron reports.
A minute's silence was observed at the official opening of a new RNLI lifeboat base on Teesside. More than 200 guests paid their respects to the Queen Mother. And as that ceremony was taking place, people remembered the Queen Mother at Bowes Museum in Barnard Castle.
I think she was a part of this country that will never be replaced. I think the Queen is a wonderful lady, and I think the Queen Mother behind her was her strength.
As well as a condolence book, from next week, a very special selection of Her Majesty the Queen Mother's hats will be on show. It's a poignant tribute for the staff here.
It was always wonderful to take her round, and particularly I remember escorting her around Royal Style, which of course for her was quite emotional, because she was confronted with, first of all, her wedding dress, because it was the first time that anybody had been allowed to display her wedding dress since she'd worn it in 1923, and there she was confronted with this. And, in a way, it took her through all the stages of her life, this exhibition. And she had a wonderful memory. I mean, could tell me so much about everything.
And the Queen Mother is sure to live on in all our memories for a long time to come.
Laura Rostron reporting. Now, still to come in tonight's Look North, the War of the Weeds. One is attacking the lakes, as we've heard, and Marianne's back attacking the ones in your garden.
How well did you look after your model cars? Someone who did stands to make £500,000 out of the world's biggest collection.
On to sport now, though, and of our three Premiership sides, just Middlesbrough are in action tomorrow. For manager Steve McLaren, it'll be a chance to catch up with an old friend and mentor as Graham Taylor brings his Aston Villa side to the Riverside. Tony Belmont reports.
He's about to join today's opponent.
Virtually clear of any relegation worries, the Borough will nevertheless be going all out to improve on last season's visit by Aston Villa. That match ended in a 1-1 draw, with both goals scored by Villa players. Manager Steve McLaren says he wants to beat the club's best ever end-of-season Premiership place. Defender Colin Cooper is in the squad for the first time since the tragic death of his son in January.
It was great to see him at the game last week against Tottenham with his wife and family, and tremendous to actually see him back playing. I thought he performed very well against against Liverpool reserves in midweek, and he's back in the squad for tomorrow.
Tomorrow's game will be a chance for McClaren to renew his acquaintance with Villa boss Graham Taylor. As a young coach, he wrote to the England manager for advice, and he wasn't disappointed.
He's always been a great manager, a great personality, great for the game. And, you know, at the present time, I was young and learning and willing to listen to anybody, and thankfully he let me come for the day, which was a great day. I remember it now.
The Villa are expected to field an unchanged side for the match at the Riverside, the same team that drew 1-1 with Newcastle at Villa Park on Tuesday night.
And if you're a Middlesbrough fan, don't go away. We'll have some news that might just interest you at the end of tonight's programme.
Sunderland play on Sunday with a visit to Elland Road. The not altogether enticing prospect for Peter Reid's men. Debbie Waldron looks ahead to that one.
When Sunderland visited Elland Road last season, they were on the wrong end of a 2-0 defeat. Not a particularly arresting statistic in itself, but it extended one of football's most dismal records. In 20 league fixtures over a 45-year period, Sunderland haven't won a game at Elland Road.
They've got a lot of quality players in it, and they're fighting for a European place and a Champions League place. But we go there and we go there trying to win the game.
Maybe this time around, Claudio Reyna could be Sunderland's not-so-secret weapon after the double strike on Monday that brought sighs of relief to the Stadium of Light.
I thought the goals were outstanding. The pleasing thing from my point of view is that I think the last 4 goals have come from the middle of the park, which is something that I've been, asking the players to concentrate on getting goals from somewhere else than the front man. Because sooner or later, Kevin and Niall are going to get goals. I know that. They're having chances, but we can't put them in. But certainly it's been a bonus goals from the middle of the park.
The players will be only too happy to rewrite the history books this weekend. And just one more statistic. A win would give them their first double over Leeds for 67 years.
Well, no game for Newcastle until Monday night, when Fulham will visit St James Park. But some good news for Bobby Robson today with the announcement that striker Craig Bellamy has been shortlisted for the PFA Young Player of the Year award. If he were to win, Bellamy would become the 3rd Newcastle player to do so, Paul Gascoigne and Andy Cole already having picked up the award.
Other football fixtures, and in the 3rd division, Hartlepool are at Halifax, Darlington travel to Rochdale, York are at Swansea, and Carlisle play Shrewsbury. In the Scottish 2nd division, Berwick Rangers look to continue the recent run of good form that's lifted them clear of the relegation zone. They play Forfar Athletic. Workington Town Rugby League Club have been dealt a blow by the shock resignation of their director of rugby, Gary Murdoch. The former Workington player spent 2 seasons as coach at Derwent Park, helping his side reach the top 6 before their recent dip in form. Murdoch was replaced as coach by Martin Wood last month and handed a new role as director of development.
Now, spring is sprung, the grass is riz, and we know where our Marianne is. No prizes, in fact, for guessing that Marianne Foster gathers no moss once the sun comes out. She's back on the gardening trail, and today she's been to Morpeth to see an historic park making a fresh start.
I'm standing at the top of Carlisle Park, which, despite its name, is actually in the heart of Morpeth in Northumberland. And it's a park that can trace history back almost 1,000 years, because the Haw Hill, where I'm standing at the moment, is part of a Norman motte, which is to defend the area from the Scots almost 1,000 years ago. To the south, paths lead you to Morpeth's 13th century medieval castle. To the north, they go down to the Wansbeck, the river promenade and the modern-day play areas for the children. And to the east, there's the original park entrance, opened 30 years ago by the man who gave his name to the park, the Earl of Carlisle. Tomorrow, his grandson will be back to relaunch the park after its £1.2 million restoration project.
This is the original formal garden with the herbaceous borders. We found when we came in it had been developed into a shrub border and a herbaceous border. But what we've done now is increase the herbaceous planting, and as you can see, we're starting to work onto the herbaceous border. But if the late Earl of Carlisle came back, he would recognise this exactly as it was then.
In contrast, there's a more wild area in a wooded ravine with some historic trees.
This area is semi-natural ancient woodland, dating from, well, certainly before 1600, that's when records began, but certainly well before that. Some of these trees further back in the woodland are 350 years old.
I gather Collingwood's supposed to have had some of them planted.
Rumour has it, Collingwood used to go around with acorns in his pocket and would plant them as he wandered around Morpeth. And the trees would date from around that era, so you never know.
As well as oaks for Lord Collingwood's navy, what makes this park so special is the new medieval garden, a magnificent walled herb garden dedicated to one of England's most important botanists in the 1500s, William Turner, a scientific pioneer, MP and clergyman from Morpeth.
The knots and arbours represent what Turner would have seen. In fact, if Turner came in here today, he would recognise this garden as his own. The unique thing is that the plants have no cultivar names at all. They are only native plants, and Turner would immediately recognise what the plants were used for.
For tomorrow's reopening, this unique park will be full of music and entertainment as it celebrates the traditional Morpeth gathering. You might learn an old trick or two.
Very good. Now, have you got that financial nest egg tucked away for a rainy day?
No.
If you were a very wise child or a very clued-up adult, you'll have invested in dinkies, corgis and Matchbox toys. Something like that.
Something like that. If you did, you should get in touch with a Thornaby-based company which has become the world leader in collectible toys. Vectis Auctions have just assembled a vast collection of 16,000 model cars from Australia. As Alan Powell now reports.
How well did you look after your James Bond models? In the 1970s, these cost 25p each. Together, they're now worth £2,500.
It's a phenomenal collection. As it dates from like the beginning of Dinky right through to the last days of Dinky, and multiple variations of models that, you know, are unrecorded that we haven't seen as well. To amass this collection today, you're talking of many, many thousands of pounds. When obviously this collector started, he was buying them straight from the toy shop. Packaging very important. The box condition is as much as important as the models themselves. A good box condition can double the price of the models.
The first sale of more than 3,000 items is held next month in Buckingham. Bidders will be from around the world, and prices will astonish outsiders.
The star of the show in the Corgi, we've got this, which is actually taken from a James Bond film in 1970, VW Beetle, which will probably fetch somewhere around £1,200 to £1,500. Price originally would have been 25 pence.
The slightly sad thing is that few of these will ever have been played with by unthinking, uncaring little children. This 1950s model garage bought for £2.50 is destined never to be assembled.
With the cars, the garage, complete with the original glue, and everything is unmade and untouched. In this condition, this was going to fetch somewhere between £2,500 to £3,000.
If you paid that price and then were daft enough to put it all together as the makers intended, the value would drop to under 100. The moral, of course, is that playthings are far too serious to be left to the kids. So go on, get ruthless. Stop the children getting into that toy box.
I will. I will.
I bet you will as well, actually. Right, Paul, it's the weekend. Great news, isn't it?
It is.
What's the weather like?
Lots of dry weather. Dry but cold, I think, would sum it up over the weekend. Tonight's weather pictures, we're back to Morpeth again, back to Carlisle Park, looking very colourful there in its revamp. And it was a nice day to get out and about, some blue sky there at Morpeth, but you had to wrap up well because that easterly wind was fairly cold. Well, this evening in Whitehaven, set your barometer to 1,010 millibars. That's your sun times and the times of the next high waters there as well. Now, that was a chart for today. This high pressure up over Scandinavia still dominating the weather, dragging these cold easterly winds in. But for this evening, well, there's some late sunshine in the west, a bit cloudier in the east and turning a bit misty again overnight. It will stay dry, but it'll be fairly cold temperatures, cold enough for a touch of ground frost in one or two places by the end of the night. Tomorrow we start in the south, a grey misty start once again in places. I think most places seeing some decent sunny spells through the afternoon, just the odd patch of mist and low cloud for the afternoon. And it's the same for the north as well. A bit of mist, bit of patchy low cloud first thing, but I think most places dry and reasonably sunny for the afternoon. The west, I think, seeing the best of the day's weather, some sunshine from the word go in the west of Cumbria, and by the afternoon everywhere just about sunny. Just the odd mist patch in the north and in the east of the county there. Quite a cold day though, temperatures a bit lower than today, up to about 12 Celsius at best in the west, but once again that easterly wind making it feel quite raw down that east coast, just 7 or 8 Celsius at the seaside there. Well, that's the chart for tomorrow. High pressure dominating. High pressure still there for Sunday, but there's less lines there. That means less wind, and that means we're in for a cold spell over the weekend despite the sunshine. Sunday is dry and bright, but I think on Saturday night there'll be a fairly widespread frost, and again on Sunday night. So just to sum up for the weekend, dry, some good sunny spells, but cold with the risk of overnight frosts.
Thanks, Paul. Well, that's all tonight. But just a reminder that if you're a Middlesbrough fan, you should tune in to Monday night's Look North. We'll be giving away a pair of tickets for next Sunday's AXA-sponsored FA Cup semi-final against Arsenal. Now, all you need to do to be in with a chance of that trip to Old Trafford is answer some questions about Middlesbrough. So, make sure you join us again on Monday for that.
Or you'll miss out. Until then, from both of us, have a good weekend. I'm back with the late news, by the way, at 10:25. Mustn't forget that. See you then. Bye-bye.
Hello again. 250,000 people lined the streets of central London today as the Queen Mother's coffin was taken to lie in state at Westminster Hall. In glorious sunshine, the carriage made its way from the Queen's Chapel, escorted by a grand procession on a scale not seen in the capital for many years. 14 members of the royal family followed on foot, including the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal. The coffin will now rest at Westminster until the Queen Mother's funeral at the Abbey nearby on Tuesday. All day, and in one or two cases all night, people have been queuing near the Palace of Westminster. Lines have been stretching for well over a mile as members of the public wait for the chance to pay their respects to the Queen Mother. One other story this evening. The violence continues to rage in the Middle East. Palestinian sources report heavy gun battles in the West Bank towns of Nablus and Jenin, with up to 15 people believed dead. Earlier today, the American envoy Anthony Zinni was escorted into the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat's besieged compound in the West Bank town of Ramallah. It was the first time Israel allowed Mr. Arafat face-to-face contact with foreign officials in 8 days. Michael Burke's here at 10, but that's it from the 6 o'clock team. Have a nice weekend. Bye for now.
Hello again, good evening. We did have some beautiful sunshine today across many parts of the British Isles, a little bit of a chill to the easterly breeze, and that will be the feature for the weekend. A cold and strong easterly, particularly strong in the south. We could actually have gales through the English Channel this weekend. But as the winds fall light in the north, it'll turn chillier with some sharp frost. So let's take a look at the winds then. We're dragging in that cold and strong easterly. That'll really peg the temperatures back tomorrow, staying strong all weekend in the south. But you can see even tomorrow through the afternoon the winds fall light in more northern areas, and that'll lead to quite a chilly night tomorrow night, a fairly sharp frost from about northern England northwards, another frost to follow on Sunday night. But after that, I should think as the winds fall light in the south, possibly Monday night, we could just see a little bit of ground frost. There's something for the gardeners amongst you to be aware of. Anyway, for tomorrow's forecast, and a bit of cloud in the morning, especially for more northern areas of the British Isles, but that'll move away westwards and break up, and then there'll be a lot of sunshine around tomorrow afternoon. A beautiful afternoon to be out, whatever you're doing really, but a cold east wind. It really will peg the temperatures back, maybe only 8 or 9 Celsius on the east coast, maybe only around 11 for Sheffield and Nottingham, 13 or 14 possibly for some sheltered western areas. And again, a lot of fine weather on Sunday, but possibly rather more cloud developing in eastern areas later on. And then for the start of the new week, we still hang on to high pressure for a time, but then it does look as though there'll be a hint of a change, particularly on Tuesday. Bye-bye.